The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Retold by Caroline Laidlaw. Penguin Active Readers, Level 6. Copyright Pearson Education Limited, 2014. Chapter 1. Alone in India. Mary Lennox woke up early. It was a hot day. Every day was hot in India, so there was nothing strange about that. It was also strangely silent. There was no sound from the kitchen and no smell of cooking. "I want to get dressed," Mary shouted. But her nurse did not come. There were dishes on the table from last night's meal. Mary felt nervous and afraid. Where were her parents? She seemed to be alone in the house. Then she noticed a little snake, which moved quietly across the floor. Chapter 2. A New Life in England. Mary waited a long time before her father's friend found her. "Why has no one come?" she asked.
"My dear child," he answered, "there's no one here. Everyone was terribly ill in the night. I'm so sorry, but your parents are dead." This news was impossible to believe.
"What will happen to me?" she asked.
"You'll go to England on a ship. Your uncle, Mr. Craven, lives there. He'll look after you," said her father's friend.
A few weeks later, Mary arrived in London on a cold winter's day. She felt lost, alone, and unhappy. Mary's uncle sent Mrs. Medlock to take Mary home. On the train, Mrs. Medlock talked a lot, but Mary tried not to listen. She did not like this woman who worked for her uncle.
"What do you know about your uncle's house?" asked Mrs. Medlock.
"Nothing," answered Mary.
"Then I'll tell you. It's a lonely place, far from anywhere else. It's big and has a park and gardens all round. Once it was a happy place, but after your aunt died, everything changed. Mr. Craven, your uncle, doesn't like being there, so he doesn't often visit."
Mary was tired when she and Mrs. Medlock got off the train. "Are we nearly there?" Mary asked.
"No, not yet. A horse and carriage will take us the rest of the way," said Mrs. Medlock.
It was dark when they arrived. Mary stood in front of the house, which seemed to have hundreds of windows. She could not believe her eyes.
"Don't just stand there, child. Go inside," said Mrs. Medlock.
Poor Mary felt that she was not welcome. Her uncle was not there to meet her, and she felt sad. She just wanted to go back to India. The next morning, Mary woke up in her new bedroom. A young woman was smiling at her. "Good morning," she said. "Who are you?" Mary asked. "I'm Martha. I've brought your breakfast," she replied. "I don't want breakfast," said Mary. "Where are my clothes? Hurry up and dress me." Martha was not pleased. "You're a rude little girl," she said. "Can't you dress yourself?" "My Indian nurse always dressed me, and she did what I asked," shouted Mary. "Things are different here," said Martha. Mary began to cry. It was true. Things were very different in England. Martha took some new clothes from a cupboard and helped Mary to dress. "I like these," said Mary. "They're nicer than my black clothes." "Yes, and they're lovely and warm too," agreed Martha. "It's cold outside. You mustn't get cold. Before you go out, you should eat your breakfast." So Mary ate some bread and drank some tea. Then she remembered something. "Martha," she said, "I heard someone crying last night." "It was the wind," said Martha. "Nothing to worry about." Then Martha gave Mary a present. "Take this skipping rope," she said. "You can play with it outside." Chapter 3. Winter in the Gardens. Mary was pleased to be outside, but the air felt as cold as ice. She pulled her hat down over her ears and her scarf tight around her neck. When she breathed out, she produced a kind of mist. Some of the trees looked dead. Other trees were green and beautiful. Mary saw a small animal with a red coat and thick tail. It was a squirrel. It was jumping from tree to tree. "I can jump and stay warm too," she thought. She ran along the path and played with her skipping rope. At the end of the path, an old man was digging. "Hello," said Mary. "I thought that I was the only person in the garden. It's too lonely here. I hate England."
"Oh, is that so, young lady? You've got a lot to say for yourself," replied the old man. "My name's Ben Weatherstaff, and I'm Mr. Craven's gardener. What's your name?"
"Mary,"
she replied. "I sometimes feel lonely too," said Ben. "But I don't when the robin is here. Look, he's come to say hello." Just then, a little bird flew down and sat on Ben's spade. The robin flew to the ground when Mary moved closer. He was looking for something to eat. "Sometimes he finds an insect, but he prefers bread," said Ben Weatherstaff. "I often give him a bit of my lunch."
"He isn't shy," said Mary.
"No," replied Ben. "That's because we're friends. We understand each other. I think that he likes you too, Mary."
"Do you really think so?" she replied. She felt happy for the first time since her life in India. Just then, the robin flew away and disappeared over a high wall. "The robin's gone, Ben. Will he come back?" asked Mary.
"Oh, yes. He'll come back. He lives in the old garden on the other side of the wall."
"I want to go into that garden," said Mary.
"You can't," said Ben. "No one goes there. 10 years ago, your uncle locked the door and hid the key." The old gardener turned and walked away.
"Maybe I can find a way into the garden," Mary said to herself.
When she looked down, the robin was standing beside a hole in the grass. Something in the hole shone in the sunlight. Mary reached down and pulled a piece of metal out of the ground. It felt cold in her hand. The robin watched her closely. Suddenly, Mary realized that she was holding a key.
"It's the key to the garden door," she thought. "You knew that the key was here, and you showed me," she said to the robin. "Now I have to find the door."
The next minute, the robin flew to some leaves which were growing up the wall. Mary pushed the leaves away and saw the entrance.
"It's the door! Now let's see if the key will turn."
Chapter 4. The garden behind the wall. Slowly, slowly, the key turned in the lock. Mary pushed against the door. She kept pushing, but grass, sticks, and branches lay on the other side of the door. Then, suddenly, the door opened, and Mary stepped into a wild and wonderful garden. She closed the door and looked around. Dead grass lay round the bottom of the trees, but new life was starting to grow. Mary got down on her knees to pull away the grass. Little green plants were pushing up. The robin started to sing, and Mary knew that spring was coming.
"I love your song," Mary said to the robin. "And I love this place. Only you and I know about it, Robin. I'm going to make the garden beautiful again. I'll pull out dead plants and plant new ones. But I haven't any tools, and I don't know anything about gardening. Martha will help me, I'm sure. But I won't tell her our secret. I'll say that I want a garden of my own somewhere outside."
It was getting late. Mary said goodbye to the robin, locked the door of the secret garden, and ran back to the house. When Mary reached her playroom, Martha was waiting for her.
"Did you like the skipping rope, Mary?" "Yes, I really did, Martha," Mary replied. "But it was very cold outside."
"It's good to play in the fresh air. My brother Dickon loves being outside, even in the wind and rain. And no one is healthier than Dickon, you know."
"Does he know about gardening?"
"Yes, he does. He knows about wildlife too," said Martha. "He can charm most animals. You should see him with nervous squirrels."
"He sounds kind," said Mary. "Perhaps he'll teach me about wildlife and gardening."
Mary explained that she wanted her own garden.
Do you think that my uncle might give me a bit of ground? She asked.
Yes, he might, said Martha. But you'll need tools and seeds. I'm sure that Dickon will help. He's at home, so I'll write to him. Mary helped Martha with the letter. My dear Dickon, Miss Mary would like to make a garden. Will you go to town, please, and buy flower seeds and tools for her? She has plenty of money. Please choose the prettiest flowers which are easy to grow. Give my love to Mother, Martha. Chapter 5. Dickon. A few days later, Mary was outside when she heard music. She followed the sound to a boy under a tree. He was playing his pipe, and some wild animals were listening. The boy looked up. Hello, he said. Are you Mary Lennox?
Yes,
Mary replied. I'm Dickon, he said. I got my sister's letter. I've brought the tools and seeds.
Thanks, Dickon,
said Mary. Where's your garden? Dickon asked.
It's a secret. Promise me that you won't tell anyone.
I promise, said Dickon.
Follow me,
said Mary, and she led him towards the door in the wall. Mary took Dickon into the secret garden.
Do you like it?
Mary asked. Oh, yes. This was Mrs. Craven's garden, Dickon answered sadly. No one has been in it for 10 years, he said.
What happened?
asked Mary. Mrs. Craven sat on a branch which broke. She fell and died, Dickon replied.
How terrible, said Mary. I want her garden to be lovely again. Will you help, Dickon?
Yes, he replied. Give me the spade. I'll start digging. Suddenly, the robin flew down.
Look, said Mary. That's the robin who lives here. The garden is his secret too.
Chapter 6. 2 Surprise Meetings. When Mary went back to the house, her uncle, Mr. Craven, was there. I'm home for a short visit, he explained. Are you surprised, Mary?
Yes, Uncle,
she replied. Are you well? He asked. Do you need anything? Mary's uncle seemed kind.
I'm fine,
she replied. Then she remembered her conversation with Martha. She decided to ask for some ground.
Could I have a bit of ground to make a garden?
Mary asked. A garden? He said. Yes. Find a place that you like and make a garden.
Wonderful,
Mary thought.
The secret garden can be mine.
That night, Mary fell asleep quickly, but she did not sleep for long. The sound of crying woke her. Who could it be? It was not the wind this time.
I'm going to find out,
she said to herself.
Mary got out of bed and went quietly through the house. She came to a room where the crying was loudest. So she opened the door and went in. The noise immediately stopped. A quiet, scared little voice came from the corner. "Who are you?" it asked. "I'm Mary Lennox," she replied. "What are you doing here?" the voice asked. Mary moved towards the bed. She could see a small, thin boy with fair hair and big eyes. "Why were you crying?" Mary asked. "Are you in pain?" "No," the boy replied angrily. "But I'm ill. Can't you see?" "You're thin and your face is white," said Mary. "But I don't think that you're ill." "I am ill. I am. I'm going to die. Everyone knows that I'm ill," said the boy. He started crying again. "Please don't make that noise," said Mary. "All right, but don't go away. Stay and talk to me," said the boy. "What's your name?" Mary asked. "Colin Craven," he answered. "My mother's dead, and I don't often see my father." Mary felt sad. "My parents died in India. My home is here now. Mr. Craven is my uncle," she said. Then Colin realized that he and Mary were cousins. He asked her to tell him about India and her journey to England by boat. Colin was interested in everything. "I want to see the world," he said, "but I'm too ill to travel." "You won't see anything if you never leave this room," Mary said. "So you've got to get better." Mary was still with Colin when Mrs. Medlock and the doctor arrived in the morning. "What are you doing here?" said Mrs. Medlock. "Go back to your room immediately, Mary." Mary moved towards the door. "Stop!" shouted Colin. "I want Mary to stay." The doctor turned to Colin. "You are not well, my boy," he said. "You must rest now." "I refuse to rest. I feel better when Mary's here. She must stay," said Colin. Then Mary remembered Dickon. He was probably waiting for her. "I have to go now, Colin," she said. "I promise to come back soon." Chapter 7. Keeping Secrets. Mary hurried to join Dickon in the secret garden. He was there with his favourite animals, the blackbird, 2 squirrels, and the fox. "Sorry I'm late," she said. "I've got so much to tell you." "Don't worry," said Dickon. "You seem very excited, Mary." "That's because I've just discovered that I've got a cousin. He lives here in the big house. His name's Colin. He says that he's ill and can't go out. But I think that he just needs fresh air and exercise." Will you come and see him, Dickon? Shall we tell him our secret?
Later, Mary told Colin about Dickon and his animals, and about the robin and Ben Weatherstaff. But Colin thought that the secret garden was more interesting than anything else.
"Take me there, Mary," said Colin, "and bring Dickon to meet me." "He's already here," said Mary. "Dickon!" she called.
Dickon came in with a baby sheep in his arms. Then came the fox, the blackbird, and 2 squirrels.
"Hello, Colin," said Dickon. "Would you like to see the secret garden?" "Yes, but I can't walk," said Colin. "Don't worry," Dickon replied. "We'll get a wheelchair for you." "Is the wheelchair difficult to push?" Colin asked Dickon. "No, it's easy," Dickon replied.
Mary ran up the path, opened the door in the wall, and they all went in.
"It's nicer than I imagined," Colin said. "It already looks better than it was," said Dickon. "How will it look with 3 gardeners to look after it?" "I'll grow strong here," Colin cried. "I'll learn to walk and I'll live forever." "Then you must do exercises every day," said Dickon, "and I'll teach you. Let's start now. Arms up, arms to the side. Colin, try to stand," said Dickon.
Colin moved forward slowly in his chair and stood up. Just then, Ben Weatherstaff looked over the top of the wall.
"Hey!" he shouted. "You children shouldn't be in the garden." "I'm Colin Craven. We can go anywhere that we want," answered Colin. But, I thought you were ill," said Ben. "Colin isn't ill," said Mary. "He's just weak, but he's getting stronger. He's going to surprise his father. Don't tell anyone, because it's a secret."
"I won't tell," said the old gardener. "I love secrets." Colin often visited the secret garden in his wheelchair. He had to pretend that he could not walk. He did not want the people in the house to guess his secret.
"Mrs. Medlock and the doctor have noticed that I'm stronger," he told Dickon. "They can't understand it. They think that I'm not hungry because I often refuse to eat. I must pretend to be ill. If they discover that I'm hungry and well, they'll tell my father. But I want it to be a surprise for him. Mrs. Medlock mustn't see me eating." "Don't worry, I've got a plan," said Dickon. "I'll tell you tomorrow."
The next day in the garden, the children did more exercises.
"Stand up straight, arms up, arms to the side. 10 times, please. Turn around, touch the ground," Dickon shouted. The exercises were hard, and soon Mary and Colin were feeling hungry. Then, suddenly, Dickon produced a big basket from behind a tree. "Who's hungry?" he asked.
"We are,"
answered Colin and Mary together.
"My mother sent bread and fresh milk,"
said Dickon.
"She'll send food every day." "So that was your plan," said Mary. "Tell your mother that she's a magic person."
"And thank her too," said Colin. Chapter 8. The Magic of the Secret Garden. The children often came to the garden, and sometimes Ben Weatherstaff joined them.
"Colin, I've got a rose tree for you to plant,"
said Ben one day.
"Your arms are now strong enough to dig. Roses were your mother's favourite flowers, you know."
So Colin and Dickon dug a hole with the spade. Then Colin carefully planted the rose tree. Everyone was pleased, and Dickon's animals were excited too. The sun was going down, and the garden looked more beautiful than ever. It seemed to Mary that there was real magic in the garden. Summer was just beginning. The children were sitting round a fire, and Dickon was cooking potatoes and eggs. Life was good. Colin could run fast now, and he felt well.
"When I grow up, I'm going to be a scientist, and I'm going to study magic," he said. "When Mary found this garden, it looked dead. Then plants began to push up out of the ground. Magic made things grow, and the same magic's making me strong."
"When I arrived here, I was unhappy and lonely," said Mary. "Perhaps the magic in the garden has changed me too." "In India, I once saw a man who could charm snakes," said Mary.
"Did he know about magic?" Colin asked.
"Yes, he did. When he played a pipe, a snake rose slowly out of a basket," Mary answered.
"How interesting," said Colin.
"I think that everyone has magic powers. It's just that they don't know." Mary looked at Dickon, who had a squirrel sitting on his head and another on his arm. "I know someone who can charm animals," she said. "And he's sitting next to you, Colin." Dickon put out the fire and tidied up after their meal.
"It's time to go," he said. "Mother is waiting for me." "Let's stay just a little bit longer," said Colin. "We'll go round the garden and see the results of our hard work. Come on."
The children walked along a path, and Dickon's animals followed. Mary and Colin sang and laughed, and Dickon played his pipe. They did not know it, but Dickon's mother was watching them. "What a happy group of children," she thought. Mr. Craven should come home now to see the change in his son. Chapter 9. Voices are calling. That evening, Dickon's mother wrote to Colin's father. "I'll post the letter tomorrow," she said to herself, and then she went to bed. That same night, far away in a house beside an Italian lake, Mr. Craven had a dream about his dead wife. She was calling him home to her garden. A few days later, the letter arrived from Dickon's mother. "I think you should come home, Mr. Craven," she wrote. Why were two people calling him home? One in a dream and one in a letter. He must go back and find out. Mr. Craven's journey from Italy to England was long. He took a train through France, a boat to the English coast, and a train to the north of England. When his carriage arrived at the house, he went straight to Mrs. Medlock. "How's my son?" he asked. "He's different," she replied. "Worse?" he asked. "No, not really," said Mrs. Medlock. "The doctor and I don't understand. Colin doesn't want to eat, and he's changed. These days he's always outside with his cousin Mary." Mr. Craven went to look for his son. He felt something pulling him towards his wife's garden. Chapter 10. No More Secrets. Mr. Craven stood beside the garden wall. "Where did I hide the key?" he asked himself. "I locked the door 10 years ago." Then he heard the sound of voices. He stopped and stood still. The voices were coming from inside the garden. The 3 children were calling to each other. Colin was racing towards the entrance. "I can run faster than the wind, Dickon," he called, then fell against the door. It suddenly opened wide, and he ran straight into his father's arms. "Who? What?" said Colin's father. "Father, it's me, Colin," said the boy. "You can walk and run, and you're tall," said Mr. Craven. "The garden and my friends and the animals made me well." "It's magic," said Colin. "Come, Father, come into the garden." And he took his father's hand. Mr. Craven saw the roses, the fruit trees, and tidy paths. "It's perfect," he said. "We've brought the garden back to life," said Mary. "And the garden has made us so happy," said Colin. "Come on, everyone. Let's all go back to the house for tea," said Mr. Craven. Just